Hello, everyone, and welcome to another week of Trad Tasman Talk. It is the last day in July, the 31st. I'm Tim Wilms, editor-in-chief here in lockdown Melbourne, and also a masked up Melbourne. Well, starting Monday, it is masked up Victoria now, with our daily coronavirus curve still fluctuating in the hundreds. So we don't know if we're at the halfway mark of this second shutdown or whether there's more to come. The deaths recorded every day because of the aged care outbreaks. They also fluctuate from around about 5 to 8 and sometimes rise over 10. So we're in a state of extreme unknown.
And good evening from Auckland, and it is 8 p.m. here at the moment. There are no coronavirus updates in New Zealand here, other than at the end of the last show, I was talking about how there hadn't been any escapees from our lockdown facilities. And right as the show ended, we had 4 people escape from a Hamilton lockdown facility. One of them appeared in court. But overall, there have been no real developments there. But we are in the middle of an election season, about 7 weeks away now from election day, and so things are getting very, very interesting here.
Although I did get a news alert this morning that there has been an outbreak at a Korean food cafe in Auckland, which has been closed for deep cleaning. Are you able to shed any light on that?
I'm not sure if there's been an outbreak there at some point, but apparently there was a Korean, and I don't know whether a tourist or I suppose somebody returning with dual citizenship perhaps, who had been walking around the city and had been
were they an escapee?
Had tested positive, and as I understand it, there was some confusion around that anyway. And perhaps they simply had not been lodged as an escapee until this was discovered. So there hasn't really been much around it, other than we won't know if there is if there are any community outbreaks for however long it takes. Usually up to 2 weeks.
Well, this is what we're discovering with the so-called second wave, which is not just here in Melbourne, but it's around the world. It's concentrated over in the US and the southern states, and now Northern England. They're announcing lockdowns there as well. And now New Zealand, along with one of our states, Western Australia, has basically achieved elimination, with the only trace of the virus being those returning travelers in hotel quarantine. And everyone's heard the stories about what happened in Melbourne's hotel quarantine, and New Zealand is quite lucky that they've been able to recapture the quarantine.
There are rumors that it's sort of a bit of a show, and there may be coronavirus cases, and it's all being kept under wraps because of the election. So, but as far as we know, there have been no quarantine issues in New Zealand, not like you have had in Melbourne, and perhaps. Melbourne is an outlier there because the other Australian states have been able to keep things, have been able to effectively manage quarantine themselves.
New South Wales, they recorded above 20 new cases today, which it's been in the teens for the last couple of weeks, but now it's peaked over 20. Now Queensland is on high alert due to some return travellers from Melbourne. These 2 quarantine teens who went on a luxury crime spree in Melbourne and lied on their declaration when they returned to Queensland, and well, they were out and about. Brisbane, a whole bunch of businesses have had to to shut, and it's really triggered a mass testing there, which shows that we don't know if they're going to be proven to be super spreaders there. But we saw with the hotel quarantine in Melbourne, there's going to be a 60 Minutes Australia expose on Sunday night. But just looking at it myself, when we see, 627 new cases in Victoria today. It was 723 the day before. These and the high rates of community transmission, it's hard to see how that was all that all stemmed from hotel quarantine breaches in Melbourne. It just seems, how did it get out to that amount of community transmission? Because of we currently have at the moment it's 5,743 active cases of the virus, and 1,792 may indicate community transmission. So that's a lot if it's just from quarantine breaches.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm not really sure how far can be speculated, but obviously there's a point at which you have so many numbers that the tracing it doesn't work. Right?
Well, yeah, we've seen basically the tracing catch up where it's just
they've
a
got
monumental
all these buzzwords
challenge
around like our gold standard contact tracing. You know, we can trace and they had this discussion in New Zealand. So we can trace 1,000 people.
Oh, you've got some blue on the screen.
And we've got, we can trace this many people a day. But because the number of contacts grows by an order of magnitude, you simply can't keep up. So either you have managed to completely suppress the numbers, or they're out of control. You don't really have a middle ground in terms of, the contact tracing only works if it's already under control.
And Daniel Andrews, our premier, he's now turning up to every daily briefing, and it's clear that so he should, since he's the premier in charge of this, not getting much sleep.
This is his virus now.
Well, it was called it's been started to call the Dan flu, the Melbourne virus. There's lots of the Andrews wave. That's but they've brought in the Australian Defence Force to door knock people who've tested positive to check if they're self-isolating, because they were doing all the contact tracing via the phone, and which phone calls are easy to ignore. That's obviously the other thing is people, you're trying to do your contact tracing. You get to the point where people don't care anymore. And a quarter of those that they door knocked yesterday who tested positive, supposed to be isolating, weren't at home.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And so you mentioned last week how everyone is, when they're in public, when they're visible, they seem to be complying. Everybody's still wearing a mask out in public because that's what the government says they've had to do. So they're out there in public complying. But as soon as nobody's looking, people are simply doing their own thing, because they can't afford to do what they're being told to do, or they don't want to do it anymore, or they've lost trust in the system, which, as you can imagine, in Melbourne will be the case, because the system has failed them. So you end up in the situation where people aren't listening anymore. You're not going to be able to trace people, and you completely lose control of the population. And I suppose it will be interesting to see where they go. But trying to push how urgent they think it is, which is why they've introduced the masks, which we discussed last week, 2 weeks ago. They've introduced the masks because we need to make people think it's serious. People have got to believe it's serious, even though the masks themselves are rather irrelevant. Where do you go from here? And
I've always advocated from the beginning that it was wrong to lock up healthy people, but you should quarantine the those who are sick, the vulnerable and the elderly, which with it going through the aged care facilities where it's fair to say now the vast majority of the deaths in this second wave have been in aged care facilities. We're up to 113 deaths in total in Victoria from the coronavirus. 91 of those have been in the second wave. The worst aged care outbreak, St Basil's in Fawkner, which is run by the Greek Orthodox Church, that's now been evacuated now because residents and staff they're too compromised with the virus. But also ICU admissions, they've actually gone down from about 42 to now 31 today. There are more in hospital now, but that's because they've moved some of the aged care residents to hospitals. So this second lockdown, and we all know the economic and other health consequences of lockdowns, our hospital systems aren't being overwhelmed. Our contact tracing capacities have been, and this is the tricky thing. Those who have got it's hard to, as it's proven, this door knocking, hard to actually quarantine those with the virus. We're just putting, with the first lockdown here in Melbourne, we had the strictest lockdown. It seems that let's just ban everything and just cross our fingers that the virus goes away, which I think is what New Zealand did as well.
Yeah, and we got lucky in that it was done at an early stage. Once we had, we had like 19 cases, and the entire country was shut down. So that's, in hindsight, it should have been done at 0 cases. Then, if we were going, essentially they left the borders open while they locked the country down, of course. But that was a point at which it was basically cool. We can do this. We can get lucky, which we did. And was it Western Australia managed to do it at a similar level as well?
Yeah, because they had a hard border closure, and
so they shut everything down. They had less than 100 cases, and they shut everything down. So
it's a large state with Perth, large urban sprawl as well. But now New Zealand and WA are in the position. Yes, we're free to move around our place, but obviously
you have to keep the border shut forever, and there's no way out.
Yeah, and
as it's shown, this will continue for years, which is what the initial projection was. Hey, this is going to go for years. It's it's part of the seasonal flu now, essentially, and but that was not done. That was not considered to be acceptable anywhere except for Sweden. And I'm seeing many other countries now in South America, Central America, all over the place. People are simply opening up, countries just opening up their borders again, because it's like, well, what's the point?
Well, this is the thing. New Zealand will have a second wave, and so will WA. I assume that we're going to go through the New Zealand polls, but the international border closure is still quite popular. WA's strong hard border has a 95% approval rating.
And we talked about this very early on when the borders were first closed. It's actually, hey, the border closures are popular. Quarantining people when they come in, it's popular. I haven't done it since the Middle Ages, but hey, it turns out that it's extremely popular. Whether it is economically feasible with the way that the nation is set up, that's what will remain to be seen.
And, well, Australia is a federation. Western Australia is a state of Australia, and mining businessman Clive Palmer, he tried to get an entry permit to enter Western Australia. He's a Queensland resident, but obviously has mining interests in Western Australia. So he's now launched a constitutional challenge to WA's hard border closure, which the federal government has actually joined in, because they maintained that there was no medical advice ever to shut state borders, even though they've given their stamp of approval now for the border closure between New South Wales and Victoria. And the High Court has a very strict interpretation of the Constitution. We saw that with their decisions on the dual citizen politicians, which knocked most of them out. And our Constitution says can't restrict interstate trade or commerce. They could basically, the High Court, it won't get to the High Court until the latter end of this year. But if they knock out all the state border closures, that would mean all the border walls come down and all the penalty infringement fines or whatever for border crossers would be invalidated.
And all of the Melbournians will be on their cars driving out, spreading
There'll be nothing to stop them. They'll just go through the South Australian, New South Wales border saying, you can't do anything.
Yeah, so, which is why I suspect
well, I think there will be
down, because what's happened in New Zealand, there's a high court challenge or a review. It's a judicial review against the level 4 lockdown that was implemented in New Zealand initially. So the initial lockdown in New Zealand has been challenged to say it was unconstitutional in New Zealand. It was ultra vires, had no basis, should not have happened, and the ruling on that has been delayed until after the election. So you know what the ruling is because it's been delayed until after the election. Same thing. We had the royal inquiry into the Christchurch massacre. The mosque shootings from just over a year and a half ago now. Again, the results of that have been delayed until after the election. Kind of everybody knows what's in it already, and that's why it's been delayed until after the election.
I have this sinking feeling you might as well, because we're going to go into the polls. Jacinta Ardern and Labor are still red-hot favourites, that it's all going to unravel after the election, and the New Zealand people won't get recourse until 2024, which is
23. We have 3-year cycles, so we've got 3 years to go.
Yeah. But this is the.
But that is just something that's basically that's something that we're going to have to accept. I've already accepted it.
So second wave, it will probably occur after September.
Yeah, so people are saying, the second wave and the second lockdown is going to happen next month in August. It's like, no, it's going to happen. If it's going to happen at all, it's going to happen in October. Yeah. But keeping the borders shut, and historically speaking, that's been reasonably possible, and with today's technology, and when you're an island like New Zealand and you have to travel 1,000 kilometers over the ocean to get there from the nearest other countries. Keeping the borders secure is not really the biggest problem. That seems to be manageable, but whether it's affordable is the real question. So I'm not too worried about second wave, second lockdown. What are people going to do this again in New Zealand? But it seems like in Melbourne they kind of have, but only on the surface of it. Right? But you clearly see from the numbers that people aren't actually paying it. People are not obeying. They're not complying. People will no longer comply.
Well, Daniel Andrews, he he understands that he can't shut any more businesses down because he's already wrecked the state economy once, and obviously you need tax-paying individuals and businesses to basically fund the government. People's lives are more important than money. Until you realize that people are actually going to starve to death. Probably not quite, but they're going to have their entire lives because the stage, well, as I call it, 3.5 lockdown, because it's stage 3 with masks now. They've introduced new restrictions into 6 local government areas in Greater Geelong and its surroundings, but you'll be banned from having visitors, weddings and funerals at your home, but the pubs, restaurants, cafes, gyms and community sport can still take place, because Dan Andrews said, although it may seem counterintuitive, it's easier to enforce the social distancing on gatherings at these venues. So obviously, I know that a lot of communists would like to monitor what goes on on private homes, but it's much easier to get businesses and threaten them with fines to enforce social distancing and that. But he doesn't want to shut those cafes and restaurants there because he knows the damage it will do there. But you see, it's illegal to have friends over for dinner at Geelong now, but you can go to the pub for dinner.
Yes. I feel like there's this is, I think when communists are talking about late stage capitalism, this might be what they're talking about, is that it was illegal to have a cheap dinner in your own house, but it's okay to go out and spend a few $100s at a a Is that
you can eat inside your home, but just alone.
Yeah, but that's yeah, but with people, obviously, is what I'm talking about here. So because you can have dinner with your friends at a pub, right? That's basically it, as long as you're 1.5 meters apart.
And now with all of Victoria under a mask mandate, I asked on the Uncockables last night, Jared Seaby, how's the mask mandate is going to be enforced in pubs, because he's in Wodonga, which he can still have 5 visitors over, because Wodonga is not under stage 3 but limited to 5 house guests. He said at the pub that when you're seated and like eating and drinking, you can take the mask off, but once you get up from the seated table, you have to put your mask on.
But this was a sort of a hack that I've seen people say, is because you're allowed to eat and drink with no mask in many of these places, and on flights as well, is that what you simply need to do is order some fries or something and just carry them around with you the whole time, or have like a McDonald's Coke and just walk around with it, and then you're fine.
Though by that logic there, how come...
and then you can't spread disease either.
The logic of keeping the pubs and restaurants open in Greater Geelong under, well, I'm not, what do you call it, stage 2.5 there, because Daniel Andrews said now apparently pubs are low risk of transmission, so why can't we go to the pub now in Greater Melbourne and Mitchellshire? Why do they... because there's been the main outbreak has been in the Colac Otway Shire at a meatworks, abattoirs. They've probably been second to aged care facilities with the worst outbreaks, given that it's so hard to socially distance at abattoirs. But you see the inconsistencies there. When Dan Andrews was announcing this on Wednesday, I was like, what?
It's not supposed to be consistent. It's not supposed to make sense. It's just supposed to make people either frustrated or just give up. There's nothing else that really matters around it. That's just the way it is.
We've got a super chat in the live chat from Dia Beltran for $2.99. Thank you, Dia. She said that Peter Grace wears my knickers occasionally.
Well, nice to hear from you, Dia, and thank you for that mental image. I'm sure Tim appreciates it.
You've got the purest mind of most of the people I know, so yes, that would have been a very gross image.
Thanks. I'm not going to ask anymore. It's okay. We can move on to I suppose New South Wales, because I've actually been talking with somebody from New South Wales past couple of days, and apparently they're kind of getting back into the, it's the writings on the wall, basically.
Well, as I said, they've cracked 20 new active cases today. They've got new restrictions at gyms now. They have to have a COVID compliance officer there all the time, which means that gyms aren't open.
Do they get like a special little badge or a little uniform?
Well, I have seen I can't verify whether it's legit, but apparently there are these green vests which has a COVID compliance officer, and the photo that I've seen is of the COVID compliance officer not standing on the dots behind, like they're standing in front of the dot.
Because the rules are for you, not them, right?
Yeah, so gyms can't be open 24/7 now because I'm sure you have 24/7 gyms in
Actually, I don't
New
think we
Zealand.
do. I don't think we do.
Yeah.
Perhaps Auckland CBD, a couple, but in general, no, we don't. To my knowledge, I don't really go to the gym. Sorry, I've
Well, they've become all the rage here in Australia. Well, up until now, but they're obviously they're unmanned at like 2 o'clock in the
Ah,
morning, so they can't be open at 2 o'clock in the
all
morning.
right.
So
So
they're
the
not 24/7
compliance of,
again.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Something that's caused a lot of I would say uh, anger today because uh, we all know how the Black Lives Matter rally in Melbourne, the fact that only the three organisers were fined, it triggered a whole bunch of other protests in Melbourne as well. There were six confirmed cases who attended that rally, and it was a clear case given how they treated the anti-lockdown protests. There was another one today, anti-lockdown protest at the Shrine of Remembrance. 18 of the attendees were fined with that, but it was the clear basically because it's a cause the left progressive support, and Daniel Andrews being a far left progressive premier basically just said don't go, and did stuff that really pisses people off. So this has that's the anti-mask protest at the Shrine of Remembrance today. But the Auburn Gallipoli Mosque in Sydney has been granted a coronavirus exemption to have a gathering for 400 people to celebrate Eid al-Adha. So,
Surprise. Yeah. So I'm having a look here. Under New South Wales coronavirus restrictions, places of worship are limited to 100 people or 1 per 4 square meters. And as you can imagine, obviously the special rules for the mosque. In fact, I'm surprised it's taken this long.
Though to the credit of the New South Wales government and police, they took an extremely hard line against the planned Black Lives Matter protest in Sydney on Tuesday, which was organised by lifelong Marxist activist Paddy Gibson. I spoke about him on last week's show. It was declared illegal by New South Wales Supreme Court and Court of Appeal. 4,000 people promised to attend. Only 20 showed up, and Paddy Gibson was arrested, fined, and put in the back of a paddy wagon. And I've also heard today from Lucas Roses, who's been doing our coverage of the Sydney Black Lives Matter, that at the University of Sydney, police have shut down a campus education rally, and 2 fines were issued. So sort of it's reminiscent of how Premier Gladys Berejiklian and the police commissioner Mick Fuller, it sort of reminds me of how Trump's feds are cracking down on the Antifa in Portland. They're really going after the Sydney Marxists at the moment, but allowing this mass gathering at a mosque. But we have been told they have a COVID-safe plan.
As long as they've got a COVID-safe plan, I'm sure they will be safe. But yeah, obviously, the hypocrisy and the double standards, and the fact that this is not really about safety of coronavirus or anything along those lines. The fact that these Black Lives Matters protests or this particularly large mosque gathering is allowed to go ahead is because they're essentially pet causes of the powers that be. And that's why these things can go ahead. And it's because they know that the risk is not really that great. And obviously people can people are can be responsible for themselves. People can take a look at a situation and say, I can take the risk. I won't take the risk. But it's not allowed unless you belong to one of the special, one of these special causes. So these restrictions should lose all legitimacy with people. But I think you will continue to see most people blindly follow them, right? Because they don't want to be the one that gets in trouble, and they'll complain, they're getting special treatment, and they'll complain, and then they won't do anything about it.
Which you're talking about before, how you were observing that there appeared to be a lot of non-compliance with Victoria's second lockdown and those testing positive quarantining, and you could say that sort of attitude started with the double standards on the Black Lives Matter rallies,
and that was basically the end, right?
Yeah, that's what
we know it's not serious.
That's what Michael O'Brien, the Liberal state opposition leader here, has said, that you're not applying the law consistently, and there hasn't been equality before the law. And I reiterate my point that having a go or cracking down on healthy people, say exercising in the next suburb, when we've got people testing positive and not being at home, that's the real issue and cause for the spread, not somebody going to the next suburb to go for a walk in the park.
No, obviously not. And we had similar cases many months ago now in New Zealand, where it was a case of the police were pulling people over because they got in their car and drove 5 minutes to go to the beach, and stuff like that. And I mean, that was baloney from the beginning, and obviously illegal in New Zealand, but that won't be confirmed until after the election. So yeah. But just to finish off the mosque thing, I was just thinking about it a little more. Is at least always got a bit of respect for the Muslims there, where they've got they're willing to push the boundaries. They actually believe they actually believe what they claim, and they're willing to push for special treatment, and they're willing to demand special treatment, and they're able to get it, and they can go ahead and you don't really see that in very many other traditions, and especially most Christian groups now, more so than perhaps ever before, simply we don't want to make any trouble. We'll go along with everything. We don't complain too loudly. We keep everything private to ourselves, and we do what we're told. And sort of not a real seriousness about the faith, where essentially by their actions you're like, well, okay, well you claim to believe, but do you really believe, or are you just as afraid as anybody else?
Well, here in Melbourne, Victoria Police fined attendees at an illegal church gathering at Serbian Orthodox church.
Yeah, the Orthodox
Albans.
Okay. Other than the Orthodox, but good on them. And obviously they get targeted, and they get fined. But I suppose they're happy to wear it, and they're gonna, they'll be back the next week. I can almost guarantee it.
All right, let's turn our attention to New Zealand's numbers game. It's not the electoral curve, the electoral pendulum, as we call it.
Yeah, it just keeps swinging further and further in the same direction, though. So I'm not sure if it's a pendulum anymore. It's more like a magnet. We had two polls this last week that are worth having a little look at in the lead up, because it's sort of interesting as to the overall trend. So the first one was a news hub one, a favorite media outlet, News Hub, and they showed Labour up at 60, a whole whopping 61%, National down to 25. The recent polls have consistently been showing New Zealand First about 2%, which would knock them out of Parliament. The Greens consistently floating about 5, 6, sometimes a little bit higher, but they may just scrape themselves in.
This is the one.
This is the next.
Poll.
Yes, this is the next poll. So the next poll that was after that has similar numbers there, except for has what I would probably say are more realistic numbers there in terms of what the final result might be. Labour at 53, National at 32. It's never happened before under New Zealand's MMP system where one party has got over 50% of the party vote, but we are in rather uncharted waters here, and
It's
it's
interesting to
certainly
see ACT
possible.
up at 5%, which is the
Yeah,
threshold under to
yeah,
MMP, and that's a credit
but
to David Seymour on in both the post Christchurch civil liberties crackdown, and also with the coronavirus lockdown, actually being a real consistent libertarian and
yeah.
really be prepared to be that lone voice advocating for freedom.
Yeah, and not on every issue, but on many issues anyway. He definitely is deserving the rise in the polls there. I have seen some behind the scenes sort of skepticism portrayed at the 5%, but it's also not that important. For them to hit it, because he does have a fairly safe electorate margin, so he should be able to win that, and he will be able to bring extra MPs with him regardless.
Are the Nationals going to, because the National Party, they consistently called run dead in that seat so that
Yes,
ACT can
and
win
they have, and they will, but his opponent there is Paul Goldsmith, and I believe Paul is the right name. I'll carry on and pretend it is. And he's number 3 on the National Party list. So what happens, though, is the National Party wins about 40-odd electorate seats. And if they get less than 40 MPs on the party vote, then it means they get no list MPs. So even though Paul Goldsmith is an Epsom, he's on the list, he gets into Parliament. If the National Party gets that 25% result, or that even 30% is too low, then he will not make it back into Parliament, even though he's number 3 on the list. He's the finance spokesman. He'll be gone unless he beats David Seymour. So whether it'll be an every man for himself type of situation where he decides that he really needs that seat, and whether or not he would win it, that is an unknown at this stage. I think the National Party is still gunning for a situation where they're polling at high enough to be able to pull him back into Parliament and let ACT get a couple of extra MPs. That's a risk they're going to have to take.
And with New Zealand's electorate seats, they work first past the post. They don't have. I think Australia is one of the few nations which has the preferential voting system, or it's also called instant runoff, where the winner, the person that's elected, has to get over 50% of the vote, and in instant runoff, it's done through preference distribution. But New Zealand's electorate, it's the same as the UK system.
It's the first past the post.
Yeah, for whoever gets the most votes, whether it be 30% of the vote or 49% of the vote, they win.
What's interesting to note here as well, sort of the preferred prime minister rankings and favourability ratings. What is consistent there, as Jacinda done, is consistently up about 60% preferred prime minister, which is fairly consistent with the party vote that she's getting. So that kind of backs it up a little bit, that she's up in the high 50s to low 60s. Judith Collins, on the other hand, is at between 15 and 20%, which is the highest that we've had for a National Party leader since. I'm just having a look at the charts here. Let's see, it's off the charts. Yeah, okay, so since perhaps Bill English, who are we looking at? Yeah, so Bill English, so when was that? February 2018 is when Bill English was polling as preferred Prime Minister, on similar to what Judith Collins is now, and that's when Simon Bridges took over. And Simon Bridges himself, at his highest, polled at about 10 or 12%, half of what Judith Collins is at now. So even though the National Party vote still appears much lower, keep an eye on that preferred Prime Minister ranking, because her favorabilities are pretty good. She's at 20. Let's see, she was 50, above 50 favorability, so 55% of the country views her favorably. So that's, there's a room for growth there, and so she is at about overall a 27% positive rating, which is nothing compared to Jacinda's, which is probably more like 70 or 80. But this is the highest the National Party have had one of their leaders since Bill English left, and perhaps sort of that transition between Bill English and John Key. So there is room for them to move up, and I think you will see them go up above this negative where they are at the moment. And when some of the benefits start to run out, if they're not extended.
Are you talking about coronavirus?
Yeah, coronavirus benefits, essentially the job keep alive system that keeps paying people their wages. If those start to run out, and if they are allowed to expire, because they expire around election time, but it means that people will get their last paychecks a couple of weeks before and be laid off. They'll get their notice before then.
Because
the zombie jobs, the people who are in the zombie jobs likely will be laid off just before the election, and that could be an interesting last minute twist.
Because this is the thing with these lockdowns. They have way more far-reaching future consequences than the pandemic themselves. And given that New Zealand shut everything down, even KFC, just the supermarkets, pharmacy, and petrol stations open, that's a pretty big shutdown of the economy. Has as much of the cost been calculated yet? We heard about the US economy last night. It's it contracted by 32% in the previous quarter, the worst in history. That's massive.
That is massive, and those are not numbers we're getting in New Zealand yet. We get our numbers very delayed, which happens to work always in favor of the government. And it's possible we'll get some more numbers next month. And we won't really know how bad they will be. But what unlike the United States, we basically are paying all of that GDP drop via debt, the government. So the government is paying out the money the businesses aren't getting. So I think what you'll see in the overall drop is not really what will be what the true state of affairs is, simply because the government could afford to borrow, put another $140 billion of debt in there. That $140 billion covers the our entirety of GDP being wiped out for half a year. So
that's the same.
And that's counted in the GDP figures.
Yeah, I went through our Australia's budget update last week, and also our unemployment figures as well. And we have the Job Keeper program extended and still March, but it's been cut back. So as you mentioned, the zombie jobs and businesses, but of course it's easy for governments to both Australia and New Zealand to borrow at the moment. It's going to be our generation and the generations after your children, their children.
And maybe if we're lucky, our great-grandchildren will pay it off. And it's basically the situation is, it's fine. We keep the debt forever. that's pretty much. We just pay the interest on the debt forever. It's fine.
But it sounds like with your it's a month and a half until New Zealand election. The exact date, it's September 20th. 19th. So. It basically, all of the bad news, Jacinta has to keep her fingers crossed that it stays in the genie bottle until then.
And she's had a good run normally, and it's very rare for governments to be voted out after a first term. They've got to do something genuinely horrific. The overall favorability is still high. I don't really see a big. It can happen. I don't see it in the cards at the moment, unless you have a massive effect where people don't want to be seen publicly to not be supporting Jacinda, and then when it's in the privacy of the polling booth, you get a big swing, right? So there's that possibility for there to be a lot of deception going on there, where people are too afraid to say how they really feel, but on election day they may. When nobody's watching. So
there's this secret dissent against the dear leader.
Yeah, exactly. So whether that's going to turn into a reality, we don't know. I wouldn't pin anything on it. I would expect them to probably hit just shy of 50% or just over it. And but I do expect National to make some gains. What is interesting, worth mentioning before we get to the end here, is the rise of a social media phenomenon that I haven't really discussed before, but we have had some new parties registered just in time for the election, and those three parties are Heartland, which is basically sort of a farmers anti-global warming resistance party that's a national party members who have left to out of protest against the National Party supporting the Zero Climate Act. And they are just running in some rural seats. They're going to try and nick some of these seats off national rather than go for the 5%. So they're just farmers trying to win a couple of rural seats. And then the other one is something called the Tea Party, which is basically a Chinese businessman trying to run his own party. Don't see anything coming out of there. And the final one is Advance New Zealand, which is Jamie Lee Ross, who's the botany MP at the moment, who's was independent and formerly of the National Party, and one of my opponents in the campaign. And he has joined forces with a sort of a I don't know how I would describe him. He's a sort of a musician of sorts, I suppose, but Billy T. Kahika, or just Billy TK as he is called. And he started up this thing called the New Zealand Public Party and became a big social media event. And he sort of gathered together all of what you would call the conspiracy theorists from all over the internet, all of the 5G anti-vax coronavirus. Was it 5G causes coronavirus and the vaccines cause coronavirus? All of those people, not necessarily that's the policy they're promoting, but that's the way that that's what comes out when people look up, what are they all about? That's kind of what comes up, which is interesting to watch. But also now is sort of the prime time for this, where like now is the time for conspiracy theorists to win, kind of because the conspiracy theories are coming true, right?
Yes, and the mainstream media and government continue to lose credibility.
Yeah. And so the conspiracies start to become more and more plausible and mainstream, and even what I now see more as the fake, the true people who perhaps may have been considered as hardcore conspiracy theorists view this as a conspiracy in and of itself. So it's like we're dealing with conspiracies inside conspiracies.
Yeah, it's the people who believe that QAnon, for example, Q, is a false flag, a controlled opposition operation.
So this is more like the QAnon people. So you get an interesting dynamic here. But whether this will go, whether this will run into Parliament, I don't see it happening. But apparently, Billy himself did show up in the preferred Prime Minister ranking at 1%.
That's a start.
So that's a start, and that's quite something. So they managed to get his name into the preferred Prime Minister ranking. So there's a little something happening there for sure. Who it's going to be good or bad for, I don't know. Jamie Lee Ross was basically toast without this, and he's thrown all of his hopes on Billy TK. Whether they're going to get along, I don't know. This seems to me, watching these two people and what I know about them, looks to me like they're not going to get along, right? They both want to be at the top, and they're co-leaders, but you can't have, there's not enough room
ego game.
Yeah, I don't think there's enough room for the two of them up there. That's what I can see. I could be proven wrong. What I see up there is an interesting and there's very little to go on at the moment, other than it is basically you can I put a link in there. You can show the audience a couple of pictures very quickly, just so they know who we're talking about. So they had their party launch in Auckland just last week, and they had a big they sold out a stadium. So if you look at the top there, but they managed to seat like 1,000 people at a stadium. You can see Billy there on the left and Jamie on the right, and down to the image where you're at, and then that's if you stop at that one for a second. So that's Billy on the left, Jamie on the right, and whether they are going to get somewhere, we will find out. they managed to sell the 1,000 seats or something. People have travelled from all over the North Island to come and see them. So they definitely managed to create a little micro phenomenon, and whether they can take that enthusiasm and in 6 or 7 weeks turn it into electoral success, who knows? They don't have a ground game. They don't have any kind of resources that I know of. They don't have anything except for huge social media following, people who are very, very intense online, and trying to get into the media. Obviously, the crazier your ideas are, the easier it is to get more social media flack. Sorry, not social media, but mainstream media flack. So you get the mainstream media to come after them and call them, crazy, which they might be, and that's what they're hoping will propel them forward. So.
Yes, which has been proven to work for some controversial people in the past. But while we're speaking on social media, this has been in the works since the beginning of the year. Federal Treasurer Josh Frydenberg, he announced today a draft. It's a draft digital platforms code, which basically it's a draft mandatory code of conduct governing digital platforms and media businesses. So this is released by the ACCC, Australian Competition and Consumer Commission, which basically directs the social media giants to enter into negotiations with the news media publishers to come to an arrangement where the social media giants will remunerate the media companies for using their content on their platforms, which basically it's because we've documented it many times on this show. The mainstream media is going broke. They blame the power of Facebook and Google for basically utilizing their content for free. If they can't come to a voluntary arrangement, then there'll be binding arbitration by the federal government. So and this comes on top of, we just saw the tech giants testify before Congress, where it's been talked about for a while whether the US would use antitrust provisions, which is sort of their anti-monopoly, anti-competitive laws, to break up the tech giants. It's been talked about for a while, and this coincided at the same time when Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube have been scrubbing the press conference of those America Frontline doctors talking about hydroxychloroquine.
Yeah, and and that's been quite an amazing watch, and seeing the amount of counter propaganda that has to be deployed to try and override at least what they see as the this is something Trump suggested, so it must be bad, so we have to suppress it. And it's weird to see them, this is not true, this doesn't work, and so they suppress it. And yet everything else that we've talked about on the show just over the past hour, all of these things that actually have no scientific basis, that actually are not proven to work, all of that is promoted, and yet then they claim now, look, this is because it's Trump's drug, it has to be suppressed.
But you should still listen to Dr. Fauci, though, even though he said that wearing a mask wasn't a good idea a few months ago. Now it's influenced our mask mandate here in Victoria now. Now he's back with Dr. Fauci recommending wearing goggles to prevent catching the coronavirus.
And so it's just a question of how far can we push people? What's the craziest thing that we can sell them? What's the craziest thing that we can make them do? And they'll do it. Because again, it's got nothing to do with the science. It's got nothing to do with the science, because this is all the stuff that they were saying that wasn't working. And you still have many countries around the world whose official health advice is, no, don't do this. This is not helpful. So, but it's interesting to see what is allowed and what is not allowed.
Even though we never heard of him 6 months ago, apparently he's some sort of prophet like figure, Dr. Fauci, even
Yeah,
though
they
he's
love it.
working for the Trump administration. That he seems to have some sort of pass, even though he's technically part of the Trump team.
It's interesting to discern what what's going on with what's who's good and who's bad, and it's an interesting story there. But just to attach this to this end of the social media thing, even though we went to Dr. Fauci, but Stuff in New Zealand has actually stopped posting on social media directly themselves. So as of the 6th of July, I just checked, they have not posted anything, but all of their content is still on Facebook. And if you search for them on Facebook, all of their links, all of their news stories show up in the Facebook news section. So Facebook will keep using their content, even though they themselves are no longer using Facebook. And they've been doing that for nearly a month now. Yeah. So it's interesting where they can't live without it almost, but they now it's a symbiotic relationship where they are unable to be separated. Facebook won't let them go even if they want to.
It seems like it's some sort of 4D chess virtue signal. That's what it is. Art
Exactly.
of the deal.
And they've stated similarly along those lines that they want money from Facebook. So yeah, it's interesting to see. So well, it basically wraps up the show, and we're coming up to the end of it. And I suppose I've got two little updates anyway, because I'm campaigning lots more. And I've got various events that come up on Fridays.
For the new Conservative Party.
For the new Conservative Party. So I'm running as the botany candidate for the new Conservative Party. Give your party vote to the new Conservative Party, guys. I should do a little bit of campaigning on the show. And I've got various, obviously going to have various different events and spend as many extra evenings as I can out doing campaigning stuff, delivering flyers, meeting people, knocking on doors, all of the good stuff that I've got to do. And that means that I'm going to probably not have that many more Friday evenings to do the show until the September special that we're going to do on the 19th. Just check it. Saturday the 19th. So we'll do an election night special. In between now and then, I'm not sure how many shows we'll do. There's definitely no show next Friday. And we may do an occasional Tuesday show, but likely no show for the next 2 weeks or so, and we'll try and squeeze one or two into the middle there. So stay tuned on the, which in my case, it will be announced in the Right Minds group, at least on the day, or the day before if we can. Or it'll be the day, we'll announce the day before at least, in the Right Minds group, or I suppose for Tim, your case, your Telegram channel is the best place to go, or Parler.
I mainly, Telegram, Gab, and Parler are my preferred communications at the moment. And obviously, with the disruptions the lockdowns have caused, I've shifted my Wilms front schedules. We've shifted this show as well. Obviously, our audience are now sort of used to the fact that we will change some of the times and days given the current situation. Well, Daniel Andrews has flagged on Sunday he might announce further restrictions. So who knows when I'm going to be broadcasting next week, because we just talked about Dr. Fauci and the goggles. Who knows what they're going to mandate next?
You'll be wearing underwear on your head next, Tim.
But yes, so we'll try to do a show when we're both available, because we do want to keep you updated on the New Zealand election campaign. I certainly want to as well, because MAGA 2020 New Zealand is as important as US MAGA 20.
So we'll do one at least somewhere in the middle of August. At least get one show in August, but it's definitely not going to be next week. So
and at the moment, I will be back with a Wilms front next week. But I can't tell you whether this stage, obviously, as Dieuwe just said, I'll notify you on Telegram, Gab, or Parler, whether it's going to be a Monday, Tuesday, or a Wednesday show. We'll just, it's basically just, what is that, one half day at a time now.
Yes, it's But you do the best you can, Tim, and stay positive, stay safe. I've got one last update myself as well. I said last week I was going to have the first day in court on Thursday for my police trespass case, and that did happen. So it was apparently very, very quick in the morning. The Crown wanted to proceed directly to settlement conference, which most definitely is something that I didn't want to do. But my lawyer argued that obviously the fact that they have not provided us with any discovery, we don't even know the full scope of what's gone on because they haven't given us any information. The police are still being incredibly secretive for some strange reason. So my lawyer successfully said to the judge, no, we need to have a trial date, which the judge agreed with. We need to, so he set a trial. So we are guaranteed to get some discovery. We're guaranteed to get the documents that we need. And obviously, what I really don't want a settlement because that's going to be resolved behind closed doors. And what I'm really after is obviously a verdict that what the police did to me was unlawful. And that's the whole reason that I'm doing this. So day one was a success, and likely, it's been 6 months to get this far. But I'm told it can, it can be as little as 6 to 12 weeks to get a court actually get a trial date set. So that could move things along quite quickly if we can. But who knows where things are at with the coronavirus delays. And if anybody wants to support me, RightMinds.nz/donate, and keeping costs very, very low. I'm not doing a big fundraising campaign, but I know there are people who have said, hey, look, I just want to pitch in a little bit. So you can go to rightminds.nz/donate if you would like to help a little bit, and that just makes things a little bit smoother and easier for me and Amy. Amy doesn't have to worry them spending all of her money on courts. And
well, that's what is it? No, it's the money that you earn, which you give to her in housekeeping.
Yeah, exactly. A wife bonus. She doesn't want it eating into her wife bonus. So, and I see some people in the chat say yes. Thanking me, and yes, I am trying to keep people updated, and this is basically the first real update I've had in 6 months. So there you go. I will keep you updated as much as I can, and that's everything from me. And I won't see you next week, but stay tuned, keep following us, and we will let you know when the next show is going to be. And we're definitely going to have an election night special on Saturday, September the 19th. That's the one to put in your calendar.
Oh, it's good that we finished on some good news because we certainly need it.
Yes. try and keep focused on the positive, even though the show is all about talking about the news, which is only ever negative. Yeah.
Well, we have to be blunt with our audience about the reality of the situation, and we know better than anyone to not say yes, trust the government and the media. Everything's going to be okay.
Everything's going to be okay. So, well, thank you, everyone. Good night. Stay safe. Stay free.
Good night, everybody.